There was a house on the southern edge of Ballarat that hadn't had a heartbeat in years. Weatherboard, once white, now grayed to the shade of bone left too long in the sun. The kind of house you'd miss unless you were looking for something, already gone. Its gate hung like a broken promise, swinging just enough to whisper but never loud enough to draw help. Windows veiled in cobwebs, garden overtaken by stubborn weeds and yellowing bindi. And in the center window, always the same one, sat a cat, with ears like torn parchment and fur the color of cooled ash. No one knew when she started appearing. Some said she'd always been there, like the house had grown her. Others thought she belonged to a widow who used to sweep the footpath every Sunday until she didn't. No one claimed her. No one fed her. But every morning, every dusk, no matter the wind or the calendar, she sat at that window, silent, still, and facing out, never pawing, never meowing, just watching. As though someone once said, "Wait here," and forgot to return. The neighborhood around her changed in that slow, aching way regional towns do. Old men died, yards turned to gravel, the milk bar became a dentist's office, and then a for lease sign no one took down. Kids grew up, moved out, left behind. Letters never posted, but the cat remained, unmoving, unwavering, eyes like wet glass. She didn't follow the sun. She didn't chase shadows. She didn't twitch at birds. As if the part of her that was animal had long since given way to something deeper, something bound to time itself. Locals began calling her Window, not out of affection, but habit. "Saw a window again," they'd say, as if she were a fixture, like rust on the letterbox or the creak in the step no one fixed. Some left scraps now and then, dry biscuits, a tin of tuna if they remembered, but she never left her post to collect them. They'd disappear overnight, sure, but whether eaten or carried off by other strays, no one knew. She didn't beg. She didn't come close. She simply endured. Once, a boy, maybe 10, threw a rock at the glass, not to harm, just to see if she'd move. She didn't. The rock chipped the corner, left a crescent scar. The next day, she was there again, same position, as if nothing had happened. The boy never came back. What unnerved people wasn't her silence. It was the constancy, the way she seemed to be waiting not for food, not for company, but for something far more specific, as if she knew exactly what, or who, was supposed to return, and was prepared to wait through rot, rain and rot again until they did. Neighbors whispered theories, each more romantic than the last. "She's waiting for the old woman," they'd say. Maybe they made a pact. Maybe she was the only soul left when the woman passed. Others said she was cursed, a ghost in fur, stuck in the final place she felt safe. But no one asked the real question. What if she wasn't waiting for someone who left? What if she was waiting for someone who never arrived at all? Even the council gave up. A notice was taped to the door once, orange and loud, vacant, scheduled for review. It peeled within a week, forgotten like most warnings are. Some tried to enter, out of pity or curiosity, but the door wouldn't budge, not locked, just stuck, like the house had swallowed its key long ago. And so, she stayed, watching. 1,000 days is just a number until you live through it. Until. Each morning stretches like a string pulled taut, fraying with each silent hour, until each evening arrives not with relief, but with the ache of another unfulfilled promise. And yet, she waited, because some things don't move unless they're seen, and some hearts don't stop until they hear a sound worth turning for. The seasons didn't pass so much as dissolve. Rain had its own memory, drumming across the sagging roof in rhythms that only the old house seemed to understand. Autumn left, behind trails of brown across the cracked window pane. Summer bleached the garden into a kind of tired gold, brittle and yielding. Winter brought mist that clung to the glass like breath from a ghost who never got to say goodbye. And through it all, she remained, a silhouette outlined by silence. Neighbors came to treat her presence like background noise, the kind you stop noticing until someone points it out. The mailman would pause, glance toward the window, then look away before he felt something he couldn't explain. A woman walking her dog quickened her step near the house, always keeping to the opposite side of the footpath, not because the cat scared her, but because the sadness was too loud, and no one wants to feel that kind of ache during their morning routine. Window never moved, or if she did, it was only after everyone was gone. Her body never curled in sleep where they could see. She never scratched, never yawned, never blinked in daylight, just sat, spine straight, eyes fixed outward, tail tail curled tightly like a thought she couldn't let go of. Kids dared each other to knock on the door. Some tried. None stayed long. One girl swore she heard a voice from inside, whispering her name, but no one believed her. They said she made it up. Maybe she'd been watching too many old films, but even she stopped walking that way after sunset. Council officers came once, measuring the property line and taking notes that no one would read. One of them stood at the window, staring back at the cat with the kind of look people give when they see their own grief reflected in something they can't touch. He didn't knock. He just stood there, then turned and left without speaking. They didn't come back. The town forgot her slowly, as people often do with things that stay too long. A bakery opened 3 blocks away. A real estate sign went up and came down without comment. Life moved around her like water, finding a new path when the old one floods. And still, she waited. No one knew what she was waiting for anymore. Maybe even she didn't. But there was something sacred in her refusal to leave, in the way her body had shaped itself into that window frame, like she was carving herself into time, one still day at a time. Inside the house, dust coated everything in soft layers. Cupboards sagged. A teacup remained in the sink, stained and untouched. The smell of lavender lingered in the carpet, faint and ghost-like, a scent that belonged to someone whose name no one remembered. There were no photos, no letters, no clues to a life once lived, just silence, stacked like folded linen, untouched for years. But every morning, without fail, she would climb to the window, no matter how stiff her limbs, no matter how long the night had stretched. She would sit, eyes facing the street, ears angled slightly forward, not fully alert, but not at peace either, like someone listening for a song that used to mean something, long after forgetting the lyrics. And there was something about that window, that single pane of glass separating memory from world, that held a kind of quiet holiness, as if her presence gave it purpose, as if, without her, the house would finally let go and crumble. But it didn't, because she didn't. Because someone once told her, in a voice now lost to time, "I'll be back before you know it." And she believed them. It was a Tuesday when the yellow first appeared. Not in the sky, which was heavy with the kind of clouds that smothered sound, nor in the brittle wildflowers that lined the footpath. It was in the form of a raincoat, oversized, creased, and so bright it looked out of place against the muted tones of the street. The figure inside it stood at the gate, motionless for longer than felt polite, staring up at the house as if trying to remember something they'd never actually known. They didn't speak, didn't call out, just stood there, one gloved hand resting on the rusted gate, the other holding a small, crumpled paper bag. The wind moved around them, lifting the hem of the coat like it was trying to reveal something underneath, but the figure held still, like someone trying not to disturb the past. Window didn't move, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Her body remained precisely where it had always been, eyes level with the street, spine like iron, but her ears twitched, not dramatically, just a small, reluctant fold that betrayed something under the surface. The figure stayed for 7 minutes, then turned and left, leaving the bag at the base of the gate, nestled in a patch of overgrown lawn where the bindee had started to brown at the tips. The raincoat disappeared into the street's slow silence, swallowed by the same road that had failed to return whatever window had once been waiting for. The bag remained untouched until dusk. Birds circled. A dog passed by and sniffed but didn't dare approach. When night finally peeled the sky into black, Window moved. Not out of hunger, not in any way that resembled need. She descended from the window slowly, joints stiff with time, movements deliberate. The bag smelled faintly of chicken and rice, still warm enough to mean someone had carried it close. She didn't eat there. She took it, piece by piece, back inside, past the splintered threshold, leaving a small trail of crumbs that would disappear by morning. And when dawn returned, so did she, back at the window, back in place, as if the encounter had never happened. But the next day, the raincoat came again, and the next, always silent, always stopping just short of entering the gate, always leaving something behind. Food, yes, but sometimes other things. A scrap of wool, a pressed flower, a pencil sketch of a cat on a torn envelope. Each item placed gently, deliberately, with the kind of care only someone who knows how to be forgotten can offer. Window never approached while they were there, but her ears folded more often now. Her breath left slight clouds on the glass, betraying the shift in her rhythm. And though her eyes never wavered from their distant stare, Her tail would sometimes flick, a single slow arc, like the memory of movement long unpracticed. The neighborhood noticed, but didn't comment. The raincoat figure had no car, no clear reason to be there. They arrived on foot, sometimes from the east, sometimes the west. Once during a thunderstorm, soaked through but still holding something, a warm blanket sealed in plastic. It was left at the gate without ceremony. Window watched it sag in the rain, then pulled it in piece by piece under the cover of dark. Days turned into weeks, weeks folded into months, and still the exchange continued. Silence for presence, waiting for witness. Nothing spoken, nothing asked, just a shared understanding between two beings who refused to let go of whatever had once mattered enough to wait for. And though the town continued on, cars passed, shops opened, people argued about bin days and footy scores, something about the street had shifted. Not enough to name, just enough to feel, as if the air near that house had changed density, as if hope, once dried and brittle, had taken in just enough moisture to bend, but not yet break. Window didn't move from her post, not when the council came again. Not when a teenager tried to film her for a dare and dropped his phone running away. Not even when a fox prowled too close one night and left a trail of broken paw prints in the dew. But there was something different now. The way her eyes softened slightly at the sound of footsteps. The way she turned her head, just barely, when the raincoat figure stood too long at the gate. And though she never left the window while they were near, the house seemed a little less empty. The silence, a little less cruel. She didn't know who they were, but they had chosen to return, and that alone was a kind of miracle. It began like any other morning. Fog rolled in soft and thick, wrapping the street in a hush that made every sound feel like an intrusion. The gutters overflowed with yesterday's leaves, and somewhere a magpie sang too early, its voice echoing down the empty bitumen like it was looking for someone to hear it. Window was already at her post before the light fully settled, her body still as stone, eyes fixed outward. She didn't scan. She didn't search. She simply waited, as she had on the days before, and the days before that. By now, the figure in the yellow raincoat had become as much a part of her rhythm as the weather. Not daily, not predictable, but consistent enough to build a new kind of silence between them. One that pulsed, low and steady, in the quiet hours between arrival and departure. She never moved while they stood at the gate, but the air around her always changed. You could see it in the way her ears settled, in the faint flicker of her tail as it curled tighter, in the subtle lift of her head, just enough to be noticed by someone paying attention. But that day, the gate remained untouched. Mid-morning came, and with it the low groan of trucks from the highway. Noon passed, sun climbing behind its veil of thin clouds, casting a white glow over the weeds that had begun to flower in tiny, defiant bursts. Still, no one came. By mid-afternoon, the wind picked up. It moved the bag left from the day before, causing it to rustle against the wire fence in irregular, unsettling bursts. Window didn't flinch. She'd been through wind before. Through storms and thunder and more than a few careless thrown stones. But by dusk, when the sky bruised purple and no yellow figure had appeared, something in her shifted. She stood. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden leap or stretch. Just the slow, uncertain rise of limbs unused to change. Her legs trembled slightly. One paw lifted, then hesitated mid-air, as if unsure of its destination. She turned her head, not toward the street, but inward, toward the house. A place she hadn't looked at, not properly, in over 2 years. Behind her, the house echoed with the kind of stillness that doesn't come naturally, the kind that builds when no one has, spoken in too long when walls forget the shape of voices. The floor creaked beneath her weight as she moved away from the window, each step deliberate, cautious, not out of fear, but because it had been so long since she'd done anything else. She passed the hallway, where a scarf still hung on a nail, by the door. It smelled faintly of lavender and damp. The kitchen held the same cup in the sink. The lounge room, once tidy, now draped in dust-thick cloths. She stopped in front of a door at the end of the corridor, closed, untouched. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, she pressed her forehead lightly against the wood, a soft, searching gesture. The door didn't open. Nothing changed. But she stayed there, motionless, as if listening for something just beneath the surface. A sound, a memory, a heartbeat. Night fell fully. She returned to the window, slower now, climbed back into place, fur brushing the sill, paws tucking beneath her chest. But her gaze had changed, no longer fixed. It drifted now, left and right, scanning the street, with a subtle urgency that betrayed her composure. And still, they did not come. That night, she did not sleep. She did not descend for food. She waited, wide-eyed, through every shift of moonlight, through every creak and groan of the old timber, through every passing car that wasn't theirs, because this time, something was missing. Not just them, but the certainty, the small quiet, promise that they would return, even if not now, even if not soon. And when the morning came again, colorless and cold, her body hadn't moved, but her breath left marks on the glass again. Only this time, they looked less like breath and more like fog pressed from the inside, the kind that builds when something old is breaking down, or when something faithful is beginning to unravel. She missed them, not in the way humans speak of missing, with words and phone calls and restless scrolling, but in the deeper, older way, the kind of missing that settles into bone, that doesn't announce itself, only dulls the edges of things. She didn't know how to name it. She only knew that for the first time in 1,000 days, she looked away from the window. It was just for a moment, a flick of the eye, a quiet, reflexive glance towards the hallway where the light no longer reached. But it was enough to shift something, enough to make the air feel heavier, as though by breaking the rhythm she'd honored so long, she'd loosened the thread holding time together. Her body still faced outward, her paws curled just as before, her spine drawn into that tight curve of waiting, but her attention had cracked, and cracks let things in. Outside, children passed by in pairs, arms full of school bags and loose talk. A bus coughed at the corner. A dog barked at nothing, but none of it reached her. She stared at the floor now, not out of curiosity, but because looking out felt too fragile, as if her watching had kept the world in order. And now, in breaking that gaze, she'd broken its promise. The days grew quieter after that, not in volume, but in weight. The silence no longer wrapped itself around her in familiarity. Now, it pressed in, tight, suffocating. She still rose with the sun, still sat at the window, but her stillness had changed. It was no longer composed. It was brittle. Her ears, once gently alert, now flattened more often. Her tail rarely moved at all. Each morning she checked the gate, not by rising, but by waiting for a shadow to stretch across the footpath in the shape of that yellow coat. It never came. The items at the base of the fence remained untouched for days now, slowly surrendering to weather. A pencil sketch curled in on itself from damp. A plastic-wrapped blanket yellowed at the edges. The food, when it came, went stale under the sun. Inside, the house began to show its hunger. Floorboards groaned longer. The cold held tighter. Dust thickened in places no breath had reached. And sometimes, late at night, the sound of something shifting, a wall settling, or perhaps a memory trying to breathe again, would echo down the corridor. She no longer turned her head at those sounds. They were not the ones she was waiting for. On the 7th day without them, she did something she hadn't done in years. She stepped outside, not far, just onto the porch, where the timber dipped beneath her weight. The air was wet, tasting of metal and wattle. Her paws hesitated on the boards, as though the world might reject her for breaking her own vow. But it didn't. It simply stood still. She looked toward the street, not at the gate, but beyond it. The horizon was hazy. The bitumen stretched in both directions, identical in its indifference. She didn't call out. Cats don't beg. But there was a sound inside her, not loud, but persistent. The sound of something once loyal becoming unsure. She returned to the window, slower than before, and resumed her post. But she didn't face the street. She turned slightly, just enough to catch the doorframe in her peripheral vision, just enough to keep both the world outside and the silence inside in view, as if choosing finally not to place her faith in one over the other. And in that moment, quiet, unmarked by anything visible, the waiting changed. No longer hopeful, no longer anchored, just habit, just history, just the echo of something once promised, now unspoken, trying not to be lost. The scar had always been there, but it took her a long time to see it. Not because it was hidden. It wasn't. It ran along the frame of the window, just beneath where her left paw always rested. A thin, shallow groove in the timber, about the length of a hand. Faded now, but still there if the light caught it right. She hadn't noticed it all those years because her eyes were always elsewhere, trained outward, searching. But now, With her gaze turning inward more often, it revealed itself like a bruise beneath old paint. She leaned forward, gently pressing her paw against the mark. The wood was dry, slightly splintered, but warm with memory. Something about the shape felt intentional, not scratched by accident, carved, with purpose. It was a name once, perhaps, or a date, or just the habitual motion of someone who waited too, someone who needed to leave behind proof they'd been there, that they'd hoped. The air in the house shifted around her, not colder, just stiller, like the house had held its breath for too long, and finally exhaled. Dust danced in the sunlight slanting through the grime-streaked glass, each mote a tiny fragment of something once alive. She followed the groove with the tip of her claw, not to damage it, but to feel it, to trace whatever history it held. The act was small, almost nothing. But in her body, it landed like thunder. Outside, the world remained indifferent. Cars rolled past, leaves rustled in the gutters, but none of it reached her. The only sound she truly heard was the faint scrape of claw on scarred wood, a sound that didn't echo, but resonated, as if the timber itself remembered the hand that made it, as if the house, after all this time, still grieved in silence. That night, she didn't return to the sill. She curled up instead beneath it, nestled into the frayed corner of an old rug that still held the scent of warmth. Her body, always coiled in readiness, finally relaxed, not from comfort, but from exhaustion. She slept with one eye half open, her tail twitching in small, fitful dreams. Outside, the wind knocked once against the wall, then left. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed, but she didn't rise, not even when the moonlight caught the mark in the wood and made it gleam like silver. In the morning, she returned to her post, but now her paw hovered just above the groove, a silent acknowledgement, not yet trust. She watched the street, yes, but she also watched the scar, as if part of her had started listening not just for footsteps outside, but for whispers inside. For the first time, the waiting was shared. She began to notice other things too. A teacup with a faint crack she'd never seen, a threadbare curtain stitched with tiny, invisible X's near the hem, the shallow indent on the floor where a rocking chair had once swayed. All these small wounds of presence, reminders that someone had lived here, had waited here, had perhaps been forgotten here too. It changed the texture of the silence. It no longer felt like something imposed on her. It felt inherited, like grief passed down, gently, quietly, with the hope that someone would remember, not loudly, just enough to keep it alive. And so, she waited, not for rescue, not even for return, but for meaning, because once you find a scar, you have to decide what it was left for, to be healed, or to be held. It came at dusk, not with warning, not with fanfare, just a sound, small, human, and real, that cracked the air like lightning in a dry sky. One knock, not hard, not soft, measured, intentional, as if whoever made it had stood there for a long time before lifting their hand, as if they understood the weight of sound in a house where silence had been worshipped for years. Window didn't move straight away. Her ears twitched, then stilled. Her eyes, always half-hooded now, opened fully. She listened, not to the knock itself, but to what followed, the silence that returned, trembling at the edges, like it didn't know what to do with itself anymore. She rose slowly, joints reluctant, tail dragging slightly. Her body moved with the weight of someone who knew that even small choices could unravel everything. The hallway seemed longer than before, every step echoing louder, the boards groaning under her paws like they were trying to warn her. But she kept moving, one deliberate step after another, until she reached the door. It was closed, still swollen in its frame, still painted with the dust of seasons, but it had been touched. That much was clear. The air around it was warmer, disturbed. She sat, not to wait, not in the old way, but to consider. There was a new kind of silence now, not empty, full, brimming with the possibility of change. And change is a dangerous thing when you've lived by routine. When your bones have shaped themselves to the contours of waiting. Another knock. This one softer, not hesitant, reverent. She blinked slowly. Her body didn't flinch, but her breath caught for just a moment. It left a soft fog on the glass near the side of the door, and she realized then she was no longer waiting for a face. She was waiting for a sound, for a moment that would prove she had not been wrong to hope, even when hope had begun to rot. The door creaked, not open, just shifted, enough to let in a slice of air she hadn't smelled in years, warm, damp, touched by eucalyptus and wool and something else, something human. She stood, pressing one paw against the base of the door, her claws curling not to strike but to feel. The sound of breath, not hers, reached through the gap, close, near, still silent, but trembling with presence. She did not run. She did not retreat. She waited, not with desperation, with readiness, because this time, the knock had come to her, not as a question, as an answer, a promise that maybe, just maybe, not all things disappear forever, that some leave only to circle back, changed, humbled, but present. She pressed her head gently to the wood, not to push, just to listen. And on the other side, something waited too, unspoken, fragile, but there. The door didn't open that night. No footsteps entered, no hand reached out, but the knock had landed, and it had moved something far more important than a lock. It had moved her. She found it by accident, though nothing felt accidental in that house. The cupboard beneath the kitchen sink had always been swollen shut from water damage, its base long surrendered to rot. But on this morning, when the wind groaned low through the chimney and the light fell a little differently through the broken blinds, she pressed her shoulder against it out of habit, and it gave a soft snap, a whimper of wood, and then it opened. Inside, nothing remarkable, just a rusted tin, a cracked bowl, the kind of yellowed sponge that never fully dries. But tucked behind the pipe, nearly flattened and wrapped in plastic like it was never meant to be seen again, was a photograph. Its edges curled, the ink blurred from time, but the image was intact. Two women, standing side by side in the doorway of the very same house. One older, hand resting on the knob like she owned the door. The other younger, almost hidden in the shadow of the porch beam, holding something small and pale against her chest. A kitten maybe, or a bundle of cloth. The cat did not study it like a person would. She sniffed gently, then lay beside it. Her body formed a half moon around the frame, not to guard it, but to anchor it, as though the photo, even buried beneath layers of dust and years, had been waiting too. The tile beneath her was cold, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes half closed, ears twitching only when the breeze through the cracks made the plastic crinkle. She stayed like that for hours, a figure curled around a moment that didn't belong to her, but explained everything. Later that afternoon, she dragged it, slowly, clumsily, but with purpose, from the kitchen to the hallway, where the light struck just right for a few minutes each day. She left it there, facing up, and then returned to her place by the window, not to sit, to stand, her posture taller than usual, alert in a way that looked almost foreign. Her eyes scanned not the horizon but the footpath, not with expectation, but with awareness. Something in her had changed, not softened, not broken, but clarified. The house had always held the weight of memory, but now it had proof, a face, a moment, an anchor. She stopped checking the gate after that, not because she had given up, because she no longer needed it to make sense. The knock, the silence, the yellow raincoat, none of it asked to be resolved. What remained was not the question of return, but the decision to remain, and she had made it, not in a single breath, but over 1,000 silent days. The photograph did not move again, but neither did it disappear. It yellowed slightly more, curled tighter, but held its shape, like her. A remnant of a presence no longer arriving, but no longer gone. That night she didn't return to the window. She lay at the threshold of the kitchen, tail curved toward the hall, eyes open but still, and in that quiet, the house no longer felt paused or suspended. It felt complete, not finished, just settled, like a song that doesn't end but fades, still playing in a room no one enters anymore. The morning arrived without warning. No golden hue, no soft shift in air, just light, flat, indifferent, pressing through the window like it had every day before. But the house felt different, not colder, not quieter, just still in a way that asked to be noticed. The kind of stillness that settles only once something has finished. She was not at the window, not at the rug, not curled in the hallway where the photo still rested beneath its film of plastic and dust. She lay by the back door, a place she had never sat before. Her body stretched out along the line where sun used to land in spring. Her breathing was slow, shallow, like someone listening from very far away. There was no pain in her shape, no drama, just the soft collapse of something long held, the tension that had kept her upright for 1,000 days, waiting, watching, remembering, had finally let go, not with force, with permission. Her eyes were open, but not wide, just enough to see the outline of the trees through the warped fly screen, just enough to hold on to the color of the world, one final time. A eucalyptus branch swayed outside, its shadow flickering across her fur. She blinked once, slowly, as if marking something. The photograph remained untouched. The last dish of food sat full near the sink, stale but unspoiled. Nothing had moved, and yet, the entire house felt rearranged, like a story that had reached its last word, not with a full stop, but with a breath, a knowing, that nothing more needed to be said. She exhaled once more, long, thin, final, and then she didn't move again. No one found her that day, or the day after, but she was not alone. The house held her, the floorboards, the doorframe, the faded curtain with the tiny stitched repairs. All of it carried her shape, her weight, even the wind, brushing lightly through the cracks, seemed to soften as it passed through, as if paying respect. The yellow coat never returned. Or if it did, it came too late to matter. But the knock had happened. The presence had been real, and that was enough. Some lives do not end with witnesses. Some lives end with completion. She had waited until it changed her. She had listened, until the silence spoke back. She had held space for what never came, and in doing so, became the story herself. When the door finally opened, weeks later, the photograph was still there, curled, yellowed, waiting in the light. Someone picked it up, turned it over. On the back, written faintly in pencil, a name barely legible. Not the cat's, not the woman's, just a date, a promise that something once began here. She left nothing else behind, except her shape in the floorboards, and the silence that only breaks after it's truly been heard.